Hi everyone, and welcome to week 6. The focus of this week's class is really going to be to explore and investigate concepts that relate to literacy learning for English learners, as well as classroom discourse and related concepts. In particularly, we're going to be looking at ways to scaffold English learners speaking and listening in the classroom. So just to give you a little bit of an overview of what you're going to need to do for this week's class. In the way of assignments, one of the things that you will need to do is to go in and read very carefully the assignment guidelines for the resources kit, and then I've created a question and answer forum within ReggieNet for you to, if you have any questions about the requirements for that assignment. In addition, you have your book club response paper 1, which is due. That is due this Friday, September 28th by 10 p.m. And I have created here in ReggieNet a place for you to submit that. A link to the resource kit guidelines, as well as a link to the Q&A forum for that. In terms of what I'm going to be asking you to do in this online class, you have the 2 readings, Chapter 4 by Kim and Hinchy, and you have Chapter 2 in Gibbons. The first thing you should be doing is watching this video. And then after that, I'm going to have you complete a quiz. That's in quotation marks because I'm not grading the quiz. Like, you basically, if you complete it, you get full points for doing that. If you don't, you don't. And you can take that quiz as many times as you want. And my purpose for that is to really get you, just for you to check your knowledge about certain key concepts, particularly as they relate to the Gibbons chapter. You're then going to be using those concepts to conduct some small group analyses of short videos. Oh, and I also have you watching an extended video to help you contextualize some of the information from the readings. So that's really the activities for this week's class. Before you engage in those, I want to provide some information to you about WIDA. So the document that I'm showing you here is inside one of the WIDA documents that you're going to have to download into your resources kit. In particular, I'm looking at one of the first pages of the 2012 English Language Development Standards document. WIDA, what does WIDA stand for? WIDA stands for something like World Class Instructional Design and Assessment, something like that. Several states use WIDA standards for teaching English learners. And so as future teachers of English learners, you need to be familiar with the WIDA standards framework. I'm really going to be giving you more of an in-depth introduction to WIDA in a few weeks. But some of what you're going to be reading about and doing for this week's class pertains to WIDA. So I just wanted to give you a very brief overview. The WIDA standards framework is divided, it has many integrated components. There are general principles of language development that I think echo some of our readings for the whole course. It also has a can-do philosophy, which sounds a little bit cheesy, but it's basically, the idea is that we're trying to build on what students bring from their homes and communities into the classroom context and grounding instruction on that. WIDA includes elements of academic language, and that's something that we're going to be talking about more next week and in the ensuing weeks, in particular as we talk about lesson planning. But you will see some emphasis also on academic language in the readings for this week, in particular in the Gibbons chapter. One of the things I really want to focus on right now as pertaining to week 6 are performance definitions. And what performance definitions refer to, actually, you know what? before I do that, before I talk about performance definitions, let me just give you an overview here of the standards. The WIDA English Language Development Standards are really broken down into 5. So the first one, or standard 1, really refers, it's English language learners communicate for social and instructional purposes. So really that's referring to the kind of language that gets you through your school day. Can I go to the bathroom, get up and line up, take out your books for math, or whatever it is, right? A lot of the sort of social and then instructional interactions about routines, things like that. The other 4 really have to do more with the academic content. So if you look at the abbreviation column on the right, that's just an abbreviated form of saying what the standard is. So standards 2 through 5 refer to the language of language arts, the language of mathematics, the language of science, and the language of social studies. So the idea here is that the standards are meant to support us as teachers and to ensure that we're supporting our students and not just being able to understand content, but that they can communicate about academic content, so that they can communicate information, ideas in the language arts, in mathematics, in science, and in social studies. So now I'm going to jump down to these performance definitions, because these performance definitions really have to do with communication. So when we're talking about communication and we're talking about these English language standards, we're really thinking about 4 different performance definitions. And these are divided into the receptive aspects of communicative performance. And what I mean by receptive is when you are receiving information. So this has to do with listening and it has to do with reading. So you're receiving orally information by listening, and then you're also receiving information as you're reading. Now, for those of you who've already taken some literacy methods classes, and if you've already read Chapter 4 of Kim and Hinchy, we know that reading isn't just receptive. We're really integrating what we already know about the world with what's in the text to construct meaning. But the idea is that listening and speaking are very different in terms of what's required of us as we communicate than speaking and writing. Speaking and writing are considered to be more productive domains of communication. So we produce speech, right? We produce language orally, and we also produce language in writing. And so these things, as I already noted, are very different from receptive skills such as reading and listening, and they require that we attend to some different things in the classroom. When you're doing the readings this week, you're going to be learning about, in Kim and Hinchy, you're going to be learning about literacy development in the first and second language and how we support literacy in the second language, and you'll be learning all about what literacy is. For those of you, again, who are either concurrently enrolled in or have already taken a literacy methods class, you might notice some differences here in how literacy is talked about in those courses. Traditionally, the field of education has talked about literacy or the language arts as there being 4 of those arts of language: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Nowadays, we recognize that there's more to literacy than that. And in your literacy methods courses, they may emphasize visual literacy or viewing and visually representing, which really has to do with how we interpret visual images, pictures, movement, that sort of thing, and how we create meaning through visual images, right? So, and Kim and Hinchy talk about that. I believe they introduce you to the term multimodality or multimodal texts, so you can keep an eye out for that. The reason I'm mentioning this is in the area of English language development and bilingual education, because the emphasis is more on language communication, because that's really the primary difference when we're thinking about your English language learners, is the language of instruction, right? Because of that, WIDA is really just focusing on speaking, writing, reading, and listening. Now, that doesn't mean that visual literacies and the ability to interpret texts and other kinds of texts aren't important. And in fact, when you do your reading in Chapter 2, you're going to be learning all about how visual elements can support children's communication, their listening, speaking, reading, and writing in English or in their second language. But so even though visual literacies are in there, the primary communicative components that WIDA focuses on are speaking, writing, listening, and speaking, and not so much on visual literacies as one of the language arts. So, I would invite you, in all of your spare time, to delve into the WIDA documents as you're compiling your resources kit. Later on in the semester, we'll be engaging with these documents more carefully, more closely, and more thoughtfully, and thinking about how we can use them to plan instruction for English language learners. So I think that is all for my introductory video. Let's briefly take a look at the weekly schedule. As a reminder, due to my family circumstances, I have had to put next week's class online. So if you missed that memo last week, you can see that change is highlighted here for week 7. So that will be online again. So I won't be seeing you all again until October 11th. So keep an eye out for that class, as usual, to be live on either Sunday or Monday next week. By then you will have turned in your book club reflective paper number 1, and you should be well on your way to completing the resource kit. So that's all for now. Enjoy this week's class, and do shoot me an email if you have any questions or issues accessing any of the materials. Bye.